The year was 2387, and Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Liberty, staring out at the endless stars. 3 years had passed since humans first met aliens, and those 3 years had been full of disappointment. The Galactic Coalition had 12 powerful alien races, and they all thought humans were weak and stupid. Jake remembered the day when Earth got its first alien visitors. Everyone was excited. They thought it would be like the movies with friendship and sharing technology. Instead, the aliens looked at human ships and laughed. They saw human weapons and shook their heads. When human diplomats tried to join important meetings, the aliens gave them small jobs in empty space, far from anything important. The Coalition gave humans 5 old ships and told them to patrol the outer rim. This was space that nobody else wanted. It was full of asteroids, old mining stations, and sometimes pirates. The aliens called it babysitting duty. They thought humans would either get killed quickly or stay busy with small problems. Jake's ship was one of those 5. The Liberty was small compared to alien ships. When a Krathari war vessel flew past, it was like comparing a motorcycle to a truck. The Krathari warriors were 8 feet tall with thick armor-like skin. They could lift a car with one hand. Next to them, humans looked like children. The Veltar were even worse. They moved so fast that human eyes could barely follow them. Their ships could turn and spin in ways that would make human pilots sick. When they talked, their voices were so quick that humans needed computers to understand them. Then there were the Mentari, who could read minds and talk without words. They looked at humans like humans might look at pets, smart enough to do tricks, but not smart enough for real conversation. Admiral Lisa Brooks commanded all 5 human ships from Terra Station. She was a tough woman who had spent 20 years in Earth's Navy before the aliens came. The aliens gave her orders through a young Coalition officer named Sub-Commander Yithkar, who was barely old enough to fly his own ship. Admiral Brooks, Yithkar said during their weekly meeting, his blue skin showing the spots that meant he was trying not to laugh. The Coalition has a new assignment for your fleet. Lisa kept her face calm, but Jake could see her hands tighten on her coffee cup. She had learned not to show anger when the aliens talked down to humans. What kind of assignment? She asked. Pirates, Yithkar said, like he was talking about cleaning up trash. The Zephyrian Empire has been making trouble in the outer systems. Small raids, nothing serious. We thought your people might want to practice. Jake knew about the Zephyrians. They used to be part of the Coalition until they got kicked out for being too violent. Their ships were big and powerful, and they loved to fight. Calling them small pirates was like calling a shark a little fish. How many ships? Lisa asked. Our intelligence says maybe 50 vessels, Yithkar said, not looking up from his datapad. Nothing your people can't handle, I'm sure. After the meeting, Lisa called all 5 ship captains to a private channel. Jake saw the other faces on his screen. Commander Rick Torres from the USS Defiance, Commander Susan Blake from the USS Retribution, Captain Dan Rodriguez from the USS Vengeance, and Captain Nicole Hayes from the USS Guardian. Well, Lisa said. Thoughts? 50 Zephyrian ships against our 5, Rick said. He was a quiet man who used to fix engines before becoming a captain. That's not practice. That's suicide. Maybe that's the point, Susan said. She had been a Marine before space duty, and she never trusted aliens. Get rid of the human problem without getting their own hands dirty. Jake studied the star maps on his screen. The Zephyrian raids were happening in the Kepler 442 system, right in the middle of human patrol space. It was full of asteroids and old mining equipment. Not a good place for a big space battle. They expect us to fail, he said slowly. Either we run away and prove we're cowards, or we fight and get destroyed. There's a third option, Lisa said. Everyone looked at her. We win. Dan laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Admiral, I respect you, but we're talking about 50 enemy ships. Each one bigger than our whole fleet put together. Size isn't everything, Lisa said. Remember, these aliens have been fighting the same way for thousands of years. They have rules, patterns, honor codes. They think everyone fights like they do. Nicole leaned forward on her screen. She was the youngest captain, but she was smart. What are you thinking? I'm thinking, Lisa said, that humans have spent 3 years being underestimated. Maybe it's time to use that. Over the next week, human ships began moving toward Kepler 442, but they didn't move like an attacking fleet. They moved like patrol ships doing normal duty. Jake took the Liberty through asteroid fields, mapping hiding spots and checking old mining stations. Rick took the Defiance to survey the outer planets. The other ships spread out across the system. To anyone watching, it looked like humans were just doing their regular patrol work. The aliens had taught humans to stay in their assigned area and not cause trouble, so that's exactly what they appeared to be doing. But Jake knew better. In the asteroid fields, human engineers were working day and night. They planted sensors that could track ships but were too small to see on scans. They set up weapon platforms disguised as broken mining equipment. They put remote-controlled mines inside hollow asteroids. Lieutenant Amy Carter, the Liberty's tactical officer, worked with engineers from all 5 ships. She was good with computers and better with weapons. While the ships moved around the system, she was building something the galaxy had never seen before. "Captain," Amy said one evening as they finished placing the last hidden platform, "are we really going to try this?" Jake looked at her young face. She was 26 years old and had never been in a real space battle. None of them had. Humans had been at peace for 50 years before meeting the aliens. "Amy," he said, "every species in the galaxy thinks they know what humans are like. They think we're weak because we're smaller than Krithari. They think we're slow because we're not as fast as Veltar. They think we're stupid because we can't read minds like Mentari." "Maybe they're right," she said quietly. Jake smiled. "Maybe. But they've never seen what humans do when someone threatens their family. And every human colony out here, that's family." 2 days later, long-range sensors picked up a massive fleet jumping into the system. 47 heavy cruisers and over 200 smaller ships, all flying Zephyrian colors. War Master Krekthos had brought enough firepower to destroy a planet. The trap was set. Now it was time to see if humans could spring it. The Zephyrian fleet appeared like a dark cloud against the stars. War Master Krekthos stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bone Crusher, looking at the scan results with satisfaction. His reptilian face showed sharp teeth in what passed for a smile among his people. 47 heavy cruisers, 236 attack ships, reported his second claw, Vexitar, against 5 human patrol boats. Krekthos clicked his claws together, a sound that meant pleasure. The Zephyrians had been kicked out of the coalition for being too aggressive, but that just meant they were free to take what they wanted, and what they wanted was to prove that humans were as weak as everyone said. "Send a message to the coalition observers," Krekthos ordered. "Tell them the show is about to begin." 6 different alien ships hung back at the edge of the system, watching safely from a distance. Each one represented a different coalition species, all eager to see how badly humans would lose. The Krithari observer expected humans to run away. The Veltar thought they would surrender immediately. The Mentari had already written reports about human tactical failures, just waiting to fill in the details. Commander Rick Torres was the first to spot the enemy fleet on his screens aboard the USS Defiance. The numbers made his stomach drop. Each Zephyrian heavy cruiser was the size of a city block and carried enough weapons to level a mountain. The attack ships were smaller, but still twice the size of his frigate. "Admiral Brooks," Rick said over the comm, trying to keep his voice steady. "Enemy fleet detected. 47 heavy cruisers, over 200 support vessels." "Copy that, Defiance," came Lisa's calm voice from Terra Station. "Execute Plan Rabbit, Plan Rabbit." It was a stupid name, but it fit. When a rabbit sees a wolf, it doesn't try to fight. It runs, leading the predator somewhere dangerous. Rick turned his ship away from the enemy fleet and began broadcasting on emergency frequencies. "Mayday, Mayday, this is USS Defiance. Enemy fleet detected, we are heavily outnumbered. Beginning tactical withdrawal." The message was meant for the coalition observers, and it worked perfectly. On their ships, alien officers nodded with satisfaction. Humans were doing exactly what was expected, running away at the first sign of real danger. But Rick wasn't really running. He was leading. The Defiance moved toward the asteroid field of Kepler 442b, broadcasting distress calls and flying like a ship that was barely holding together. Rick had his engineers shut down non-essential systems to make the energy signature look like battle damage. To anyone watching, it appeared that humans were panicking. War Master Krekthos saw the human ship limping toward the asteroids and laughed. "Look how they run, just like the coalition said they would." "Should we destroy them now?" asked Vexitar. "No," Krekthos said, his eyes gleaming. "Let them run into the asteroid field. When we corner them there, we'll destroy them slowly. Let the coalition see how weak their new allies really are." The Zephyrian fleet followed the Defiance into the asteroid field, spreading out to prevent the humans from escaping. It was a classic hunting formation, used by Zephyrian fleets for centuries. Surround the prey, then close in for the kill. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the Liberty as enemy ships spread across his tactical display. The asteroids hid his ship from most scans, but he could see everything through the network of sensors Amy Carter had planted throughout the field. "They're taking the bait," Amy reported from her station. "Enemy fleet is spreading into Formation 7. Formation 7 was exactly what they had hoped for. It put the largest enemy ships in the center with smaller vessels spread wide on the flanks. Perfect for what humans had planned. Captain Dan Rodriguez moved the USS Vengeance deeper into the asteroids, broadcasting fake engine problems. Commander Susan Blake did the same with the USS Retribution, sending out signals that suggested her weapons were offline. Captain Nicole Hayes brought the USS Guardian to what looked like a desperate defensive position near a large asteroid cluster. To the Zephyrians, it looked like 5 terrified human ships had scattered in panic, each one trying to hide behind rocks. War Master Krekthos was so pleased he began planning which human colonies to raid first. "Admiral," came Jake's voice over the secure channel. "All ships in position. Enemy fleet has maximum dispersal. Coalition observers?" Lisa asked. "All watching," Nicole reported. 6 ships at safe distance recording everything." Lisa Brooks took a deep breath. In her 30 years of military service, she had never commanded a battle like this. No human had. Everything they were about to do was theory and hope and desperate courage. "All ships," she said quietly. "Execute Plan Tiger." If Plan Rabbit was about running, Plan Tiger was about biting back. The first sign that something was wrong came when Zephyrian sensors detected energy spikes throughout the asteroid field. Weapons platforms that had been disguised as mining equipment suddenly came online. Hidden sensors began painting targets with laser designators. Automated systems that had been sleeping in hollow asteroids woke up and prepared to fire. "What is this?" Vextor demanded, staring at his tactical display as dozens of new contacts appeared. Before Krekthos could answer, the trap snapped shut. Amy Carter's fingers flew across her controls as she activated the network she had spent weeks building. Weapon platforms fired in perfect coordination, sending missiles and energy beams at predetermined targets. The attacks came from every direction at once, turning the asteroid field into a 3-dimensional killing zone. The USS Liberty burst from behind a large asteroid, all weapons firing at a Zephyrian cruiser that was still trying to figure out what was happening. Jake's ship was tiny compared to the enemy vessel, but surprise was worth more than size. Torpedoes struck the cruiser's engines while laser batteries carved into its armor. Across the asteroid field, the other human ships revealed themselves in carefully planned attacks. Rick Torres brought the Defiance out of what had seemed like a panicked retreat, weapons blazing. Susan Blake's Retribution wasn't damaged at all. Every system was working perfectly as she launched missiles at 2 enemy destroyers. The Zephyrian fleet, spread out for a hunting formation, found themselves scattered and confused. Their heavy cruisers were powerful but slow to turn. Their smaller ships were fast but vulnerable when caught alone. The humans had turned the hunters into prey. Impossible! Krekthos roared as explosions bloomed across his tactical display. "They're just humans. Where did those weapons come from?" The Coalition observers were asking the same question. On the Krethari vessel, General Morthak watched human ships dancing between asteroids like they had been born there. The human vessels were still outnumbered 10-1, but they weren't fighting like any species he had ever seen. "How are they coordinating like this?" demanded the Veltar observer. "We see no command ship, no central control." The answer was simple, but no alien would have thought of it. Every human ship was commanded by someone who had grown up watching war movies, playing strategy games and reading stories about impossible victories. They didn't need central control because they all understood the plan. More importantly, they all understood how to change the plan when things went wrong, and things were definitely going wrong for the Zephyrians. War Master Krekthos realized his fleet was trapped and tried to regain control. "All ships concentrate fire! Focus on one human vessel at a time." But his orders came too late. The humans had planned for this moment. As soon as the enemy tried to concentrate their forces, the hidden weapon platforms shifted targets. Automated mines began exploding in patterns that forced Zephyrian ships to spread out again or crash into asteroids. Captain Nicole Hayes smiled as she watched enemy ships struggle to maintain formation. Just like herding sheep, she said to her crew, the real battle was just beginning. The asteroid field had become a nightmare for the Zephyrian fleet. What should have been a simple hunt had turned into chaos. Ships that had been spread out for a killing formation were now scattered and isolated, fighting for their lives against an enemy that seemed to be everywhere at once. War Master Krekthos watched his tactical display with growing anger. 7 of his heavy cruisers were already damaged or destroyed, and 15 smaller ships had been turned into floating wreckage. The humans were fighting like nothing he had ever seen before. How are they doing this? Vextar demanded as another explosion lit up the view screen. Their ships are tiny. Krekthos had no answer. In 300 years of warfare, he had fought every major species in the galaxy. He knew how Kratari fought with massive firepower and heavy armor. He understood Veltar tactics of speed and precision strikes. He could predict Mentari coordination through their psychic links. But humans, they didn't follow any pattern he recognized. Captain Jake Morrison guided the Liberty through a gap between 2 asteroids, chasing a damaged Zephyrian destroyer. The enemy ship was trying to reach the safety of the main fleet, but Jake had other plans. Amy, can you get a target lock? He asked. Lieutenant Amy Carter studied her screens. The destroyer was weaving between asteroids, using them as cover. A normal attack would be impossible. Not with conventional weapons, she said. Then let's be unconventional, Jake replied. He flew the Liberty close to a large asteroid and fired a torpedo, not at the enemy ship, but at the rock itself. The explosion sent chunks of stone flying in all directions. One piece, the size of a car, struck the destroyer's engine section like a hammer. The Zephyrian ship spun out of control and crashed into another asteroid. Jake had just used the environment as a weapon, something that had never occurred to the aliens. Across the battlefield, Commander Rick Torres was having similar success with creative tactics. His ship, the Defiance, was being chased by 3 enemy cruisers. Instead of running or fighting, Rick did something that made the alien observers question their understanding of space combat. He turned off his engines. The Defiance went dark and began drifting like a piece of debris. The Zephyrian ships, moving at high speed, overshot their target and found themselves flying into a carefully planned crossfire from hidden weapon platforms. Brilliant, whispered the Veltar observer aboard the Coalition ship. Absolutely brilliant. But the humans were just getting started. Commander Susan Blake commanded the USS Retribution from inside a dense asteroid cluster. Her ship had taken damage from a lucky shot, and her main engines were running at only 60% power. By every rule of space warfare, she should have withdrawn from the battle. Instead, she used her damaged ship as bait. Susan broadcast a fake distress signal and let her ship drift toward a group of smaller asteroids. 3 Zephyrian attack ships moved in for what they thought would be an easy kill. They didn't notice that Susan had positioned her ship near one of Amy Carter's hidden weapon platforms. Wait for it, Susan murmured, watching the enemy ships close in. Wait for it. The Zephyrians opened fire, their energy beams lighting up space. At that exact moment, the hidden platform activated and added its firepower to the battle. The combined attack overwhelmed the nearest enemy ship, turning it into a fireball. The other 2 Zephyrian vessels tried to retreat, but Susan's damaged engines weren't the only thing that had been faked. Her weapons were working perfectly, and she used them to destroy one more enemy ship before the 3rd escaped. Captain Dan Rodriguez was taking a different approach aboard the USS Vengeance. His ship was the fastest in the human fleet, and he used that speed to play a deadly game of hit and run. Dan would appear from behind an asteroid, fire everything he had at an enemy target, then disappear before they could respond. The Zephyrians began calling him the Ghost Ship because he seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. What they didn't know was that Dan was using the network of sensors Amy had planted to track their movements. He always knew where they were, but they never knew where he would strike next. Captain Nicole Hayes and the USS Guardian were holding the most dangerous position, right in the center of the battlefield. Her ship was surrounded by enemy vessels taking fire from multiple directions. Any sane commander would have retreated. Nicole wasn't feeling particularly sane. All power to forward shields, she ordered. Take us straight at that heavy cruiser. Her crew thought she had lost her mind. The Guardian was a tiny frigate charging at a ship that outweighed it by 50 to 1. It was suicide. But Nicole had noticed something that the Zephyrians hadn't. Their heavy cruisers were so big that their own weapons couldn't target anything too close to their hulls. If she could get close enough, the massive ship would become her shield against the rest of the enemy fleet. The Guardian streaked toward the enemy cruiser, dodging plasma bolts and missile strikes. Nicole's pilot, a young man named Kevin Walsh, flew like his life depended on it. Because it did. 30 seconds to contact, Kevin called out. 20 seconds. 10 seconds. The Guardian slipped under the massive enemy ship's hull, so close that Nicole could see individual hull plates on her screen. The Zephyrian cruiser's weapons couldn't angle down far enough to hit them, and the other enemy ships couldn't fire without risking damage to their own vessel. "Now what?" asked her tactical officer. Nicole smiled. "Now we knock on their door." The Guardian fired every torpedo it had directly into the cruiser's main docking bay. The explosions rippled through the massive ship's interior, causing system failures throughout the vessel. Within minutes, the pride of the Zephyrian fleet was drifting powerless through space. War Master Krekthos watched his flagship sister ship go dark and felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: fear. These humans were not fighting like any civilized species. They used tricks, deception, and tactics that seemed to come from nowhere. "Second Claw," he said to Vextar, "send a message to all ships. Form defensive formation around the flagship. We need to regroup." But the humans weren't about to let them regroup. Admiral Lisa Brooks had been watching the battle from Terra Station, coordinating the overall strategy while her captains handled the individual fights. She could see that the Zephyrians were trying to consolidate their remaining forces. "All ships," she broadcast, "execute Plan Wolverine." Plan Wolverine was the most dangerous part of their strategy. Instead of letting the enemy regroup, the human ships would prevent it by attacking the center of their formation. It meant going after the most heavily defended target in the system, War Master Krekthos himself. Jake Morrison received the order and felt his heart skip a beat. The Bone Crusher was surrounded by the 12 most powerful ships in the Zephyrian fleet. Attacking it would be like charging into the mouth of a dragon, but that's exactly what humans did when they were backed into a corner. "Amy," Jake said quietly, "plot a course for the enemy flagship." Amy looked at him with wide eyes. "Sir, that's suicide," Jake smiled. "No, Amy, that's human." The 5 human ships, battered but still fighting, began to converge on the center of the enemy formation. They moved like a pack of wolves, coordinating their attack without words. Each captain knew what the others would do because they all understood something that no alien species had ever learned. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. And sometimes when you're outnumbered and outgunned, the only way to win is to do something so crazy that your enemy never sees it coming. The real battle was about to begin. Admiral Lisa Brooks stood alone on the bridge of the USS Liberty as it raced toward the center of the enemy formation. Around her, the crew worked with quiet intensity, knowing they were about to attempt something that had never been tried in the history of space warfare. 12 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy surrounded War Master Krekthos's flagship, the Bone Crusher. Each one could destroy the Liberty with a single concentrated volley. Together, they represented enough firepower to sterilize a planet. "Admiral," Amy Carter said from her station, "enemy ships are locking weapons on us. All 12 cruisers plus the flagship." Lisa nodded calmly. She had taken command of the Liberty when Jake Morrison volunteered to lead a boarding party that would be needed later. If this plan worked, they would need someone who could think fast in close combat. If it didn't work, it wouldn't matter who was in command. "Distance to target?" Lisa asked. 2 minutes to weapons range," replied the helmsman. 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, either the human fleet would achieve the impossible, or they would all be dead. The coalition observers were probably already writing reports about humanity's brave but foolish final charge. They had no idea what was really about to happen. Captain Rick Torres brought the Defiance in from the left flank, his ship's damaged hull sparking with electrical fires. To the Zephyrians, it looked like a dying vessel making a desperate last attack. They didn't notice that the damage was mostly cosmetic, carefully arranged to hide the ship's true capabilities. Commander Susan Blake approached from the right in the Retribution, broadcasting fake distress signals about critical system failures. Her ship wobbled and weaved like it was barely under control. The enemy ships adjusted their formation to account for what they thought was a crippled vessel. Captain Dan Rodriguez brought the Vengeance straight up from below. using the bulk of an enemy cruiser to hide his approach. His ship looked like it was limping, running on emergency power. The Zephyrians prepared to swat him aside like an annoying insect. Captain Nicole Hayes drove the Guardian in from above, her ship trailing what appeared to be atmosphere from a hull breach. The enemy barely considered her a threat worth mentioning. War Master Krekthos watched the 5 human ships converging on his position and laughed. "Look at them. They're all damaged, desperate. This is their final attack. Should we destroy them now?" asked Vextar. "Let them come closer," Krekthos said. "I want the Coalition observers to see their champions die with their own eyes." It was exactly what Lisa had hoped he would say. The human ships entered weapons range, and the Zephyrian fleet opened fire. Plasma bolts and missile strikes lit up space as 13 massive warships concentrated their fire on 5 tiny frigates. It should have been over in seconds, but the human ships didn't die. Instead, they did something that no one had ever seen before. They used the enemy formation against itself. Lisa flew the Liberty directly into the center of the Zephyrian formation, positioning her ship so that the enemy vessels couldn't fire without risking hitting each other. The massive alien ships were designed for long-range combat, with weapons that could destroy targets from thousands of kilometers away. But at close range, their size became a disadvantage. The other human ships followed her lead, each one sliding into the gaps between enemy vessels. Suddenly, 12 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy couldn't use their main weapons without destroying their own allies. "Impossible," Krekthos roared. "Get them out of our formation." But the humans weren't done with their surprises. Captain Nicole Hayes launched every missile her ship carried, not at the enemy vessels, but at the space between them. The explosions created clouds of debris and electromagnetic interference that disrupted targeting systems. Within seconds, the Zephyrian formation was flying blind. Rick Torres used the confusion to do something that violated every rule of space combat. He rammed his ship into the side of an enemy cruiser. The Defiance was too small to cause serious damage, but that wasn't the point. The impact knocked both ships off course, creating a gap in the formation that Susan Blake immediately exploited. The Retribution fired everything it had through that gap, striking the Bone Crusher's rear shields. The flagship's massive armor absorbed most of the damage, but the attack proved something important. War Master Krekthos was not untouchable. Dan Rodriguez took his ship into a spinning dive that brought him under the enemy flagship's main hull. The Vengeance was so close that he could see individual hull plates and weapon ports. At point-blank range, he fired his main guns into what his sensors identified as the ship's primary power coupling. The lights on the Bone Crusher flickered, but the real breakthrough came when Jake Morrison and his boarding party reached their target. Using the chaos of the space battle as cover, they had taken a small shuttle to one of the damaged Zephyrian cruisers. Instead of trying to capture it, they had a different goal. "Kevin, you got those computer codes yet?" Jake asked Sergeant Kevin Walsh, who was hunched over an alien console. Kevin had been the Liberty's communications officer before volunteering for the boarding party. He was good with languages and better with computers. "Almost got it, Captain. These Zephyrian systems are pretty basic once you figure out their patterns." Around them, the captured ship groaned and sparked. Jake's team had fought their way to the command center, leaving a trail of unconscious Zephyrian crew members behind them. They weren't here to hold the ship. They just needed a few minutes with the right computers. "Got it," Kevin announced. "Fleet coordination codes, tactical frequencies, and command protocols. Can you use them?" Jake asked. Kevin smiled. "Captain, I can do better than use them. I can improve them." What Kevin did next would be talked about in military academies for centuries. Instead of just using the Zephyrian command codes to predict enemy movements, he began sending new orders through their own communication system. Orders that sounded perfectly legitimate, but would lead the enemy ships into positions where the human fleet could destroy them. The first sign that something was wrong came when 2 Zephyrian cruisers received orders to change formation. The commands came through proper channels with correct authorization codes, so they obeyed without question. The new positions left them exposed to attack from the human ships. Lisa Brooks realized what was happening and smiled grimly. "All ships, enemy vessels are moving to new positions. Engage targets of opportunity." The Retribution and Guardian concentrated their fire on the exposed cruisers, overwhelming their shields with sustained bombardment. Within minutes, both enemy ships were drifting hulks. War Master Krekthos finally understood what was happening when he received a message that his own ships were somehow being controlled by the enemy. "How is this possible?" he demanded. The answer came over his own communication system, but the voice was human. "This is Captain Jake Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. Your fleet coordination system now belongs to us." What followed was 18 minutes of the most intense space combat ever recorded. The human ships, guided by real-time intelligence from their captured command post, struck with surgical precision. Enemy vessels found themselves isolated, outmaneuvered, and destroyed by an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The Zephyrian fleet began to break apart. Ships that had entered the battle confident of victory now fled in panic. War Master Krekthos watched his fleet disintegrate around him and realized he was witnessing something that would change galactic warfare forever. These humans didn't just fight differently, they thought differently. They turned weaknesses into strengths, disadvantages into opportunities, and desperate situations into victories. As the 31st enemy ship exploded in a ball of plasma fire, Krekthos made a decision that would save his life and doom his reputation. He ordered a full retreat. The remaining Zephyrian vessels, including the damaged Bone Crusher, jumped to hyperspace and fled the system. They left behind a field of wreckage and the growing realization that everything the galaxy thought it knew about warfare had just changed forever. Admiral Lisa Brooks stood on the Liberty's bridge, watching the last enemy ship disappear into hyperspace. Around her, the crew worked to assess damage and casualties. All 5 human ships had survived, though some barely. "Admiral," Amy Carter said quietly, "we're receiving priority communications from the Coalition observer ships." Lisa could imagine what those messages contained. Fear, confusion, and a desperate need to understand how 5 small human ships had just destroyed most of a fleet that should have annihilated them. "Tell them we'll file a full report," Lisa said, "after we take care of our wounded." But she knew the real report would never capture what had really happened here. How could she explain that humans fought with something no other species possessed? How could she describe the desperate creativity that turned impossible odds into victory? The battle was over, but its consequences were just beginning. 3 weeks after the Battle of Kepler 442, the galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. The combat recordings had been studied by every military academy, analyzed by every strategic planning committee, and discussed in every command center from the Krathari homeworld to the edges of Veltar space. The conclusions were all the same. Humans fought like nothing anyone had ever seen before. General Morthak of the Krathari War Council stood before a massive display showing the battle footage for the 100th time. His 8-foot frame was rigid with concentration as he watched 5 tiny human ships destroy a fleet that should have crushed them like insects. "Pause it there," he rumbled to his aide. The image froze on the moment when the human ship Liberty positioned itself in the center of the Zephyrian formation. How did their commander know that our weapons couldn't target something that close? "Unknown, General," replied his tactical advisor, a younger Krathari with fresh battle scars across his armor-plated chest. Human military doctrine was limited to planetary conflicts before first contact. They had no experience with space warfare tactics. Then how? Morthak demanded. How did they know exactly where to position their ships to neutralize our standard formation? The advisor had no answer. Neither did anyone else in the Krathari military. Their tactics had worked against every enemy for thousands of years. The idea that a species with no space combat experience could instantly identify and exploit weaknesses was beyond their understanding. Similar conversations were happening throughout Coalition space. The Veltar High Command had slowed down their normally lightning-fast discussions to carefully examine every second of the battle. Their ships were designed for speed and precision, but the humans had somehow outmaneuvered them using vessels that were comparatively slow and clumsy. "They anticipated our movements," said Fleet Commander Zigtal, her voice a rapid buzz of confusion. "But how? We never transmitted our tactical plans. There was no way for them to predict our formations." The Mentari Collective was perhaps the most disturbed by the human victory. As a species that could read minds and share thoughts instantly, they had always believed that mental coordination was the key to superior tactics. The idea that individual humans could work together so perfectly without any psychic connection challenged their fundamental understanding of warfare. Captain Nicole Hayes stood in the Coalition, council chambers on Proxima Station, facing representatives from 12 different alien species. She had been promoted to admiral after the battle and given command of the expanded human defense fleet. The same aliens who had once dismissed her as a primitive patrol officer now hung on her every word. "Admiral Hayes," said Counselor Yithkar, "the same young officer who had once given humans their babysitting assignment. The Council requires a full explanation of human tactical doctrine." Nicole looked around the chamber at faces that showed fear disguised as curiosity. These were some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, and they were afraid of what 5 human ships had accomplished. "With respect, Counselor," Nicole said calmly, "I'm not sure you would understand our tactical doctrine." The chamber erupted in angry voices. Several species took this as an insult to their intelligence, but Nicole raised her hand for silence. "I don't mean you lack the intelligence," she continued. "I mean you lack the context. Every species here has evolved to fight in specific ways. Crithari use overwhelming force. Veltar use speed and precision. Ventari use psychic coordination. You've all developed perfect tactics for your particular strengths." "And humans?" asked the Crithari representative. "Humans adapt," Nicole said simply. "We don't have overwhelming force, so we use surprise. We're not the fastest, so we use misdirection. We can't read minds, so we improvise. Every human commander learns to think like their enemy, and then do something the enemy would never expect." Counselor Yithkar leaned forward. "You're saying human tactics are based on unpredictability?" "I'm saying human tactics are based on survival," Nicole replied. "When you're smaller, weaker, and outnumbered, you learn to fight dirty. You use everything around you as a weapon. You turn your enemy's strengths against them. You never give up because giving up means dying." The chamber fell silent. These aliens had ruled the galaxy for millennia, confident in their superiority. The idea that desperation could be turned into a tactical advantage was foreign to them. But the effects of that realization were already spreading throughout known space. Captain Jake Morrison received reports of these changes as he toured the Outer Rim territories aboard the newly commissioned USS Defiance, on the name honored Rick Torres's original ship, which had been too damaged in the battle to repair completely. Pirates and raiders who had once seen human colonies as easy targets now avoided human space entirely. Word had spread through every criminal organization in the galaxy. Humans bite back. The hegemony slavers, who had been planning raids on human mining colonies, canceled their operations and moved to easier targets. The Black Star pirates, who had laughed at human patrol ships just months before, now fled at the first sign of human vessels. But it wasn't just criminals who were changing their behavior. Admiral Lisa Brooks stood in her new office at Terra Station, looking at intelligence reports that would have been impossible to imagine a month ago. The Veltar Confederation had requested military exchange programs. The Mentari Collective wanted to study human decision-making processes. Even the proud Crithari had quietly asked for tactical consultations. "Admiral," said her aide, Lieutenant Amy Carter, who had been promoted after her exceptional work during the battle, "we have another request for military cooperation. This time from the Andorian Republic." Lisa smiled as she read the message. The Andorians had been one of the most dismissive species when humans first joined the coalition. Now they wanted human advisors to help redesign their fleet formations. "What should I tell them?" Amy asked. "Tell them we'll consider it," Lisa said, "after they agree to our terms." The terms were simple but revolutionary. Any species that wanted human military cooperation had to accept humans as equals, not junior partners. They had to share technology and intelligence freely. Most importantly, they had to acknowledge that human tactical doctrine was a legitimate and valuable approach to warfare. It was a complete reversal of the relationship that had existed just weeks before. Commander Susan Blake, now Captain Blake, commanded the USS Retribution on patrol in the former Zephyrian raiding zone. Her mission was to ensure that the fleeing pirates didn't regroup and return. What she found instead was something that surprised even her. "Captain," reported her tactical officer, "we're receiving a transmission from a Zephyrian vessel." Susan tensed. Had the enemy returned for revenge? "Put it on screen." The face that appeared was familiar. Vextar, the former second claw of War Master Krekthos, looked older and more tired than Susan remembered from the battle recordings. "Human Commander," Vextar said formally. "I wish to request sanctuary." Susan blinked in surprise. Sanctuary? War Master Krekthos was executed for his failure at Kepler 442, Vextar explained. I and others who served under him have been marked for death. We seek refuge in human space. It was an unprecedented situation. Enemy soldiers requesting protection from the very people they had tried to destroy. Susan made a decision that would have long-term consequences for human-alien relations. Permission granted, she said. Welcome to the Terran Protection Zone. Over the following months, more refugees arrived. Not just Zephyrians, but members of other species who had been persecuted or cast out. They came because they had heard something that gave them hope. Humans protected those who couldn't protect themselves. The galaxy was learning that humans didn't just fight differently. They thought differently about everything, including who deserved help and protection. Captain Dan Rodriguez, now commanding the USS Vengeance II, received updates on these developments during his patrol of the inner colonies. His ship was part of the new Rapid Response Fleet, designed to deal with threats anywhere in human space within hours instead of days. But the most interesting development wasn't military. It was cultural. Young aliens throughout Coalition space were studying human history, trying to understand how a species could develop such unconventional thinking. Human movies, books, and games became popular on worlds that had never shown interest in alien culture before. The phrase, "think like a human," entered common usage in military academies, meaning to approach a problem from an unexpected angle. Human tactical manuals were translated into dozens of languages and studied by officers who had once considered humans primitive. Admiral Nicole Hayes stood on the bridge of her flagship, the USS Liberty III, watching a joint training exercise between human and alien forces. Krithari heavy cruisers worked alongside human frigates, learning to use their size as protection for smaller vessels instead of just as weapons platforms. Veltar, fast attack ships, practiced the human tactic of controlled chaos, deliberately spreading their formations to confuse enemy targeting systems. Mentari ships experimented with breaking their psychic links to prevent enemy hackers from exploiting their mental connections. "Admiral," said her communications officer. "Incoming message from Coalition Command.